Well, I love that story because there's a couple who went on a journey. It started off uncomfortable. It started off a little weird. But they found a kind of significance and a joy and a happiness by living a lifestyle of generosity and service they didn't even realize that they were called to. I think there's a lot of times that we don't pause long enough to ask the bigger questions. I remember in my 20s, a man came and was speaking to me. He said, Chad, all the easy questions have been answered. It's time to answer the tough ones. I said, what do you mean? He said, how much is enough, and what will you do with the rest? He goes, now that's a question you need to answer. And I remember at, I think 24, stopping, slowing down a bit, and actually trying to answer that question. How do I want to organize my time, my life, around how much is enough, and what should I do with the rest? Really to answer the big question of why. Why am I doing what am I doing? Why am I accumulating what I'm accumulating? I'm reading a book called The Tools of Titans. It's sort of the habits of billionaires and millionaires and billionaires. And there's an interview there with Derek Shiver. He built this company in 1998 called CD Baby. It was the largest independent music label. I think doing $100 million in sales today. But he sold it for $22 million. And they asked him, like, what's your advice for people who want to just find out how to have margin in their life, be successful? He said, you got to ask the why question more often. Why am I doing this? And you got to say no to a whole bunch of good things to focus on the great things in life. You got to ask the tough questions. And he said, he likened it to a story of a donkey. He said, I heard the story of a donkey that to me is everybody in their 30s and 40s in business. He said, the parable of the donkey is that this donkey is really hungry. He sees his bale of hay over here. And he's just going over to get the hay, and then he notices to his left is a bunch of water. He says, well, I'm really kind of thirsty. And so the donkey can't decide between drinking or eating. And so he stumbles a little to the left, but not quite there. Then he thinks about this over here. He doesn't quite get there because he thinks about the water. And that donkey stumbles back and forth until he collapses and dies of both hunger and thirst. Because instead of doing one thing and then the other, he tried to do everything poorly. He said, when I'm advising people in business, especially in their 30s and 40s, it's time to focus. It's time to step back and ask why. You can do all the things you want to do, or a lot of things you want to do, but just do them in order. Don't do them all at the same time. My wife and I, one of the things, we give 10% of our income here to Horizon, and then above and beyond that, we love yearly sitting down and having another percentage of our income we pray about giving to different priorities. So one of the things we love is adoption and widows, for example. And we just feel personally called to that, so we've obviously adopted my own son. But we love looking for widows in need and personally reaching out, writing a check, inviting them over and saying, we know this is hard. I want you to know that God cares for you. And this is sort of our way of communicating God's love to you. And just this last couple months, we've gotten some notes from some of the widows that we got a chance to just love on and support. And we've just loved that journey of God using us to invest and help other people. And today, as we get back to the drawing board, first week we looked at the book of John, then we looked at the book of Romans. Today we're going to look at the book of Malachi. And it's really about this concept that your checkbook is very revealing. What do you mean? Well, your checkbook and my checkbook is pretty powerful. It reveals who has your heart. My checkbook does? Yeah. It reveals who has your heart. Your checkbook also reveals who's your boss. Your checkbook will also tell you who gets your best and where you expect your greatest reward. And so we're going to look at those in a series of tests. 4 tests we're going to look at today. And those 4 tests are going to reveal to us these 4 questions about maybe God calling you to a greater sense of purpose or a grander scale or vision for your life. So what I want to show you a quick clip to open up the book of Malachi, and then we're going to dig into these 4 tests together. And my hope is that you'll discover that God wants something for you, not something from you. He wants you to get into a whole new lifestyle of purpose and meaning that maybe things are good, but things could really be great. Let's watch.
The book's designed as a series of disputes, and most sections begin with God saying something, making a claim or an accusation, and then Israel will disagree or question God's statement. And then God will respond and offer the last word. This happens 6 times. In the first 3 disputes, God exposes Israel's corruption, and in the final 3 disputes, he confronts their corruption. And the overall impression you get from these arguments and disputes is that the exile fundamentally didn't change anything in the people. Israel's hearts are as hard as ever. The first dispute starts when God says that he still loves his covenant people despite their failures. And Israel rudely objects, saying, "How have you shown us any love?" And so God reminds them of how he graciously chose the family of Jacob, their ancestor, to become the carrier of God's covenant promises, instead of Esau, his brother, and the family that came from him, who eventually came to ruin. Remember the stories from Genesis and the book of Obadiah. And so right from this first dispute, Israel is exposed as suspicious, doubting God's love and faithfulness. The second dispute exposes a problem with Israel's second temple. God accuses the people of despising and defiling the temple. And the people fire back, "How have we despised you?" And so God responds by focusing on the people, how they're bringing shamefully lame offerings of these sick, blemished animals that show that they don't value or honor their God. But it's not just the people, it's the priests too who run the temple. They not only tolerate but participate in these corrupt forms of worship. From top to bottom, God's people have proven faithless.
So that's the opening to the first chapter of Malachi. It's a short little book. If you want to read it, you can probably read it in maybe 15 minutes. But this first test is the heart test. And God basically turns to his people and says, "You don't know how much I've given you. You really don't. You're giving me half-hearted love, but the reason you're giving me half-hearted love is because you don't realize how much I've given you." So when I look at your life, and I look at how you're participating in the full purpose I have for you, you are giving me half-hearted love. It's a halfway effort, and it's because you don't realize how much I'm connected to you. You don't realize how much I've done for you. You don't realize how much I love you. If you knew how much I've invested in you, how much I care for you, how much I've devoted to you, you wouldn't be giving half-hearted love. And so one of the tests here is that you can begin to look at your own life and say, who has my heart? Because the person who has your heart communicates where you're giving your whole heart. Because we give to places we feel accepted. We give to places we feel honored. We give to things that are high priorities in our life. And God begins by addressing them by saying, "I'm not sure you get this." In fact, I told you I was reading this book, Tools of the Titan. One of the interviews was with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it was actually amazing how humble he came across in this interview. He said, where I am today is because of so many people who loved me and invested in me and worked for me. He goes, I would never even come up with the idea of moving to Hollywood, except that, his name Reg Park. I saw him in the Mr. Universe magazine and how he turned that into a career. And that inspired me. And I had actors and fellow bodybuilders who helped inspire me. I wouldn't have been governor if people had not, voted for me. And here's somebody who's reflecting on what everyone had given to him, not just that he was a self-made man. That was even the phrase he used. People call me a self-made man, but it's because of so many people who invested in me that I love what I do. Derek Shiver, I was telling you about his story. He talked about who helped him become the musician he was and the stage presence he was today. He said when he was going off to college, he met this professor. And he said, I want to be a great musician like you. I've heard great things about you. And he said, well, tell me your plan. He said, well, I'm going to do 4 years of college. He goes, well, stop right there. Show up to my house next Thursday at 9 a.m., and I'll teach you how to be a great musician. And this guy used to actually teach. He was a college professor at that college. He said this to artists all the time. Nobody ever showed up at 9 a.m. This is the first kid who did. Kid shows up at 9 a.m., knocks on the door. He says, tell me how to be a great musician. He said, well, show me what you know. Show me what you can play. He goes, you're good. In fact, you're so good. I used to teach at the college you want to go to. You can definitely finish college in 2 years instead of 4 years. Really? He goes, yeah. The normal pace is for chumps, he said. He said, you come every Thursday and I'll teach. And he taught him music theory in like 4 Thursdays, what would have been a semester class. And then he said, you're smart enough that we have a policy at the school that you can actually read the textbooks and just take the final exam, never go to class, and you can knock out at least half your stuff. You got the skills. And he says, I look back, and this guy invested so much time, so much love, so much care in me, that, oh my goodness, my love for investing in other people and helping other people and mentoring other people has been changed because of someone who invested in me. I read another story called The Power of Us. It's the book by Henry Cloud. He describes a friend of a family member who's going through Naval SEAL training. And this training is pass-fail. I mean, if you don't finish this, you're out. And this Navy SEAL, who's in the final leg of a very long, laborious process where he's got to swim the end, and he's got to get to shore, and he gets to a place where he has dug down as deep as he can, he's done every trick he can, he has nothing left. And he literally can see the shore, but he's like, I'm not going to make it. And you could call to be rescued, and you're done, you're kicked out. And he said, I looked down inside me, there's literally nothing left in my reservoir. And my buddy had already made it to shore, and he looked out, and he yelled at me, and he says, go! Don't quit! You can finish! He said, I'm telling you, I had no resources left. But hearing my buddy call to me to finish, call to me to join him on the shore, I don't know where it came from. I had these resources I didn't have before in community. And man, something came out of me, and I finished that last leg, and I became a SEAL, not because of my own efforts, but because somebody called something out of me. And his devotion to his friend, his companionship with his friend was so powerful because he saw the power of team. That's what's going on here that God's saying in Malachi. He's saying, you're giving me half-hearted love, but it's because you don't realize how much I've invested in you, how much I've given to you, how much I've done for you, how much opportunities I've given to you. And they say, well, how have we done that? What way have you loved us? And God's like, what way have I loved you? Now, have you ever felt this way? Where you have invested, you have sacrificed, and the person not only isn't grateful, they don't even realize you've done anything? Take, for example, children. Your body literally is in a different shape today because you had them. And you have not been able to recover. You have prayed, you have worried, you have not bought this car, you have not done this, you have stayed up late at night. Why? Because you love them so much. And not only do they not see it, but they give you half-hearted, well, it's fine, okay, whatever, right? It's offensive. And you feel that. They're giving you half-hearted love because they don't understand how much you love them. That's the spirit God's bringing to this. We've seen that in jobs. You invest in a job, and you've poured yourself into it, and you feel like you're just sort of tossed off or not appreciated, or your work's not respected. So if you look at your heart, what are the areas you're giving half-hearted efforts to? It may speak to who really owns your heart. And God says, I'm not sure that I own your heart, because when I look at your life, you're not giving back to me something that represents what I've given to you. Now he moves to the second test, and the second test is the leftover test. And I love this one. God, a little sense of humor here in this one. God says, you're giving me your leftovers. And imagine, he uses the analogy of a boss. Imagine it's Boss Appreciation Day. And on Boss Appreciation Day, you've got some colleagues you're working with, and you've actually got your boss. And so you decide, well, I got to buy a nice bottle of wine, spend a little extra on that, and I'm also going to get a 2-for-1 Skyline coupon. So you got two gifts, the 2-for-1 Skyline coupon and the nice bottle of wine. Which one do you give your colleague and which one do you give your boss? Well, you decide to give your boss, the person who's got you the job, got you first break, is responsible for whether or not you get pay raises and promotions. You give him the 2-for-1 coupon, and you give a manager or colleague the bottle of wine. Nothing wrong with that. But God's saying that's not very wise, that's not very smart, that doesn't represent who has the position or authority or who's the real boss in your life. Reminds me when I was 22, I had my first job. I got my first big break. In fact, my boss really invested in me. His name's Peter. He actually came to my hometown to interview me for my first job. Incredible opportunities, incredibly how he built into me and believed in me and trusted me. Well, one day I was about 22, and he took us all out boating. And I've been boating since I was 14. I've had a boating license before I had a driver's license. I have been pulling people on tubes and wakeboards and jet skis and torpedoes for as long as I can remember. And he has not. So he enjoyed boating, but he doesn't quite have the experience that I have. And so we brought a tube that day, and my boss turned to me, he goes, hey, how about I try and knock you off the tube? I've been tubing since I was like 6th grade. I'm pretty good at it. And he's above average driver, but not great. I said, sure. And so he's whipping me around, but he's not really particularly good at this because it's got an outboard motor on it. And so I'm sliding to this side, dragging half my body in so he can't throw me off. He spins it around, I drag my body in. He is not throwing me off. He's getting frustrated because he really wants to throw off this cocky 22-year-old. And he's whipping this thing around, I'm dragging again. Finally, after about 20 minutes, he finally knocks me off. And he says, Chad, Do you want to take a turn? What do you mean? Do you want to try and knock me off the tube? I'll give it a shot. He gets on that tube, and he starts off as cocky as ever. You're never going to knock me off. I'm like, oh, I'll try. Is this the throttle? And I go out there, and man, I gun this thing, and I'm ricocheting him one direction to get the momentum going, so I can whip back the other direction, and I hit this wave. I can see another boat coming. I time this thing just right. He hits this wave. Kaboom! He's 3 feet off the air from the tube, and I got him going. I did the math one time. I was going 35 miles an hour in a circle, which meant the circumference of his circle was going about twice that. So I think when he hit the wave, he's going about 70 miles an hour is the way I calculated. He hits the wave. Kaboom! And then he actually skipped 4 times. Before he finally sank. And I was so proud of myself that day. And you know, the 44-year-old version of myself might go back to the 24-year-old version of myself and saying, I'm sure it was fun. I'm sure it was great. It may not be the wisest thing to torture your boss and maim him permanently on a little retreat. That's the analogy God gives here. He says, when you look at where you give your leftovers and where you give your best, you can actually discern who your real boss is, who you really look to in your life for your promotions, who you look to in your life for your allegiances. Here's how he says it. You keep offering defiled food on my altar. Lame offers, leftover stuff, the blemished, the moldy. That's what you give to me. You give yourself the good stuff, and you give me the 2-for-1 coupon. But they say, well, in what way have we defiled you? Stop exaggerating, God. By saying the table of the Lord is contemptible. He says, you offer me, God, the blind as a sacrifice. Isn't that evil? When you offer the lame and the sick, you bring your sick old offerings, your sick old giving. Is that not evil? Why don't you try giving to your governor, your mayor, your boss, what you're giving to me? See how that goes over. Will he accept it? Will he be like, thanks for the 2-for-1 coupon? Of course not. It's pretty challenging here because God is saying, you communicate to me the value I play in your life by what you give. And if you gave to your boss, or if you gave to your other priorities what you gave to me, it wouldn't be acceptable. It's incredibly disrespectful, is what God's saying. And it's a challenging piece here because God is showing that you can track your boss by tracking your money. And not all bosses are bad, right? You might say, well, one of the things I really enjoy is golf. And so if you love golf, you're going to see you invest money in golf, right? If you love opera, I bet you've got on your credit card somewhere that you go to opera. If you look at me, you're going to see that one of the things I love is movies. I always go Tuesday nights because it's discounted, but I go to movies probably once a week. I love movies. And so you can track in my checkbook, one of the things I love is movies. You'll see one of the things I love is God's work. One of the things we love is widows and orphans. You can figure out who's the real boss in your life, the real priority in your life, by tracking who you give. And there's times to step back and go, wow, if I say this is important, but it doesn't show up in my checkbook, I'm not sure it's really as important as I say it is. I'm not sure it's really as important as I'm telling myself that it should be. If you never have time to get away with your spouse or to have a vacation, maybe you need that to be more of a boss in your life, more of a priority in your life, and other priorities need to subordinate itself to those things. All right, let's go back to the drawing board. I'll show you another clip about chapters 3 in Malachi and the third test God gives us. We move from the heart test to the leftover test to this third test we're going to look at in just a second. Let's watch.
In the third dispute, God accuses the Israelite men of treachery against him and their wives, which of course they deny. And God exposes the toxic combination of idolatry and divorce taking place. You have Israelite men marrying non-Israelite women and then adopting the worship of their wives' ancestral gods into their homes. Remember the story from Nehemiah chapter 13. And so Malachi connects this to a wave of men divorcing their wives for no good reason. And the people are all fine with this. And Malachi says, no, it's a betrayal of your covenant with God.
So I want to call this the best test. So it's interesting, this theme of money is running through all of Malachi, and then he jumps into this relationship metaphor of divorce. And why is that? It's really fascinating. You know, as a person who's been a counselor for years, as a person who, with a team of volunteers and a team of staff, we get to see people in the best and worst moments of their relationship. And one of the themes I see often is this idea that the grass is greener on the other side. that if I just was married to that person, if I just wasn't married to this person, if I could just have that job, just get that degree, just get that promotion, just swap houses, just swap spouses, I would finally be happy. But I tell you, I see over and over again that whatever that discontent is that you still haven't found what you're looking for, you have in this relationship, you bring to your next relationship. There's a famous quote that says, "Wherever I go to and ruin everything." And so often, instead of looking for contentment and success and joy on the outside, we need to look on the inside. What is it on the inside? And I call this the best test, because where are you giving your best efforts? Where does your best time go? Where does your best energy go? Where does your best money go? And like a cow looking over a fence, we often look and think that it's out there. The grass is greener on the other side. But what God is going to say in this test is that the grass is greener where you water it. The grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. And you are not watering our relationship between you and God. And then he uses a metaphor to say, the same way you're not watering the grass between you and I'm noticing your marriage. And I'm looking at your relationships. You're not watering your own relationship either. You're divorcing your spouses for no good reason. You're just swapping spouses to deal with the own inner emptiness in yourself, thinking that it's their fault instead of looking inside. And I got to tell you, it is so heartbreaking to see how people who say they love each other can so deeply lie to themselves and hurt the people they say they care about. I mean, it's often I get a front row seat, and our team does to that. Recently, a story of a guy who was working on his marriage, and there had been an affair involved between the two of them, maybe a couple. And while he was working on his marriage, he'd come out of a marriage counseling appointment, and then he literally had called the same day to order flowers for his mistress. And so his time and energy, he said he was working on the relationship, but his time, money, and energy was going toward another priority, right? And yet the whole time truly deluded to that fact. I sat with another man whose wife had sort of gone off the rails in this season of their marriage, and so much so that she was dating somebody else and wanted him to be okay with it. And she was genuinely puzzled, I kid you not, genuinely puzzled why he was angry that she was dating someone. And he was angry. Is it okay to be angry, he said? I'm like, yes, this is appropriate anger. Of course you should be angry at this. And you're going to see God getting angry here for the same reason. He goes, I'm not going to accept your offering, he says. He goes, you're bringing offerings. They're leftover offerings. They're kind of lame. They're kind of pathetic offerings. But I'm not going to regard your offerings anymore, nor receive the goodwill from your hands anymore. Yet you say, for what reason? At least we're given something. Because of the way you're treating your spouses. Because of the way you're treating your relationships. And this is this profound connection in the Bible. That how you treat your spouse, how you treat people, reflects how you treat God. Because the people you interact with are made in God's image. And God says, you cannot pretend you have a strong relationship with me and have bad relationships around you. You cannot pretend that you're in connection with me if you're treating people made in my image poorly. And so I'm not going to accept your offering. In fact, there's a passage in Peter that's very, very stinging. It says that if you are mistreating your spouse, God will not hear your prayer. And that's really coming out of this concept from Malachi. That I'm not going to accept your offerings. I don't care how big the check is. I don't care how much money you're giving. That doesn't make up for the priority of how you invest. And so God's saying, I am angry, and appropriately angry, at how you're treating our relationship. There is a lack of priority. You're not prioritizing me. There's a lack of passion. And many of you, as we've all gone through stage, we're like, oh my goodness, I married the wrong person. Oh my goodness, this is too hard. Maybe there's somebody easier. Must be somebody out there to make this a lot easier. We've all had that conversation. We've all told ourselves that. We've all believed that. And so with that, you begin to divert your priorities, and you start giving your time, energy, and money to someone or something else. Now, it might be work. It might be you throw yourself into being a mom or dad rather than into marriage, but you do that, and the other person becomes angry. And you're like, why are you so angry all the time? They're angry because you're not giving, relationally, your best time, your best energy into the relationship. And that's why there's a fight. And God's saying the same thing. The reason he's connecting money, your giving of your time, money, and energy, to relationships, he's saying, I feel the same way. You say you want me important, you never give me any time. You say I'm important, there's never any money coming out. And it's not that God needs the money. The money represents your heart. You give to where your heart prioritizes. So that's the challenge God is giving here. And he's saying, I'm angry because of the lack of passion. I'm angry that you've neglected our relationship. Not because I got a lightning bolt and trying to hurt you, because I want more. I want to be in a kind of relationship where we had a deeper friendship, a deeper intimacy. I don't want your leftovers. You don't want my leftovers. And so that's what I'm calling here the best test. You're not giving me your best, and it's reflected, that pattern, in your relationships. You're not giving your spouse, your relationships, your best. And instead of thinking the grass is greener on the other side, I want you to start thinking the grass is greener where you water it. And you're not watering your relationship with me, and you're not watering the relationship with your spouse. Then he goes to a last test. This last test is actually, he goes to sort of the conviction side to a very positive side. The reward test. Your checkbook reveals where you think and where you feel most rewarded. And this is so practical for parenting, so practical for marriage. Let me show you what he says on the drawing board, and then we'll dig into it together. Let's watch.
In the fifth dispute, God calls the people to turn back to him, to which the people say, how can we turn back? And so God confronts their selfishness. He shows how they've stopped offering a tithe of their income to the temple. Now, that word tithe just means 1/10. It's the amount of their income and produce that the Israelites were to annually donate to support the temple and its priests. The practice is laid out in different parts of the Torah. Now we know from Malachi and from the book of Nehemiah that the people were neglecting this responsibility. And so the temple was falling into disrepair. And so God confronts them. He says he wants to bless them with abundance, but only if they're going to be faithful.
So God's going to extrapolate on this. I'll show you in a second. He's going to say, we always give to the place we feel most rewarded. So the question is, where do you feel most rewarded? And it's really easy. For me, it's simply say, the reason I give all my time, energy, and devotion to work is because I feel loved at work, I feel respected at work, and honestly, I get promoted and rewarded financially at work. Of course, I'm going to give to the place that I feel most rewarded. And when I come home, I feel criticized, I feel incompetent, I really know how to be the best dad or best mom I should be. So of course, I give my time to the place I feel most rewarded, because I don't feel competent. And we pull away from areas we don't feel competent. And we're drawn to places we feel affirmed. We give where we feel rewarded. Same way, you might say, my marriage is really difficult, work's really difficult, but I really feel like I'm a good mom. I really feel like I'm a good dad. So you sign the kids up for every conceivable thing, more than any human being should ever be signed up for. And why have you given so much time and so little margin to your schedule, except that I feel like I'm being a good mom. I feel like I'm being a good dad. And yet the whole time you're hearing your spouse say, when's there time for me? When's there time for us? You're always tired. You don't have time for. Well, you feel most rewarded when you feel like a good mom or dad, and you don't feel as rewarded because you don't feel as rewarded by what you're doing as a spouse. And so God is saying, I'm going to open the floodgates of heaven and show you the kind of reward of a grander vision for your life. I want to show you how in heaven there's a way in which I'm going to pour out meaning and purpose and respect and affirmation. The thing that you're looking for in all these other areas, by prioritizing them, you don't realize the reward that can be found by investing in the kind of life that I'm calling you to. He's going to use the metaphor of the reward coming from heaven, from the windows of heaven being open, he'll say it. But to do that, think about your marriage. Think about your relationship. Think about your parenting. If something's important to you, and you want the reward of that, you prioritize it. Beth and I were 22. We didn't make any money at all, but we were new to marriage, and we knew that of all the money we were pinching, and we're shopping at Aldi's all the time and going to discount thrift stores all the time, but we still had in our budget, we had a vacation fund, very small vacations. Listened to a lot of spiels I said no to so I could get the free vacation. And we had a lingerie fund because our intimacy and our connection was important, and we had to buy flowers, a romance fund. So as little money as we had, because intimacy and having a great marriage was important, we prioritized in our checkbook money that we could devote to that. If health is important to you, you're going to prioritize what your spending is in the areas of working out, workout equipment, a personal trainer. Why? Because you want the reward of being healthy, the reward of looking good, so you give to the area that you feel will bring about that reward. That's what God's saying here. And here's what he says. He's got 3 points that build up to this. Number one, not giving isn't neutral. Not giving always feels like taking. So in a relationship, when you're not giving to one another, it doesn't feel neutral. Like, well, that's all right. I think we're pretty much doing well. As long as you're not taking, we're fine. When you don't give priority to your relationship, don't give priority to the other person's needs, don't give priority to intimacy, don't give priority to communication, don't give priority to other people's perspective, it doesn't feel neutral, does it? It feels like people are taking from the relationship when they're not giving. And God says the same thing. Not giving always feels like taking. Will a man rob God? Like, rob God? Why are you talking rob God? You have robbed me. You have taken from me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? Stop exaggerating, God, for crying out loud. God says, in your tithes, 1/10 of your giving, and your offerings. You're cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even the whole nation. He said, by not giving to me, it's not like I need the money. But you're communicating that you're taking from my relationship and you're not investing in the relationship. And you're not giving is communicating to me that you're taking, that it's not a priority. It's the same thing you felt that led up to a divorce or is making you think about contemplating divorce. You're feeling that somebody not giving of their time, best energy, and best money for the reward of building into your relationship. You feel the taking of that. That's what God's saying. He goes on and says, number two, not giving feels like taking, and where we give and how we give matters to God. I want you to bring all, not half, not a fourth, not a little bit, bring all of your tithes to the storehouse, which was the temple in those days, so that there might be food in the house. Now, this is true financially. God is saying, I want you to bring all of your tithe to my work and to my priorities, and you're going to find that recenters your heart to my kingdom. And two, you're going to find more purpose, more meaning when you do that. Also in marriage, when you give your full time, your full energy, your full devotion to watering this relationship, everyone around you benefits. Your kids benefit. Even more than running them around to 100 different activities, having a great marriage is the best way you invest in your kids. Have a great marriage and run them around all the activities. But don't neglect the marriage. Because how we give, giving all of it, and how much we give to the storehouse, to God's priorities, really matters to God. His last point, here's sort of the benefit he gives. We give to areas we feel most rewarded. He says it this way. Now try me in this. It's the one passage in the Bible where God says, I want you to test me. Many times he says, don't test the Lord your God. Here he says, I want you to test me in this area. Look what he says. If you will test me in this area, bringing your full 10% and giving your full best to the area you want to be rewarded, will I not open the floodgates of heaven? The windows of heaven will not open. Will I not open the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it? So that's why I use the image of a slot machine. God is going to pour out significance and meaning and purpose, the kind of stuff that you've been looking for through continual upgrades or continual accumulation, all that stuff that it really hasn't satisfied more than a week or a month or a year. If you will prioritize the way in which I'm teaching you how to live, I'm telling you, it will change your life. I will pour out significance and meaning and purpose and the things you've been longing for as you look at your life this way, as you prioritize your life this way. So you say, well, you know what, maybe I'll do that with my time, but let's not talk too much about my money. Well, the research shows, and I'll talk a little bit more of this in a few weeks, that real money changes your heart more than any other issue. I listened to a TED speaker who told this story. It was great. It's the story of Monopoly. His kids love playing Monopoly. And so they're playing Monopoly one day, and all three of his kids had different strategies. One kid always bought Boardwalk, always bought Park Place, and always put hotels on it right away. He's not going to buy Oriental or any of that stuff on the first block. He wants the best. His other daughter had a different strategy. She was, whatever I land on, I buy. Whatever I land on, I buy. And that was her strategy. Well, he started to notice a pattern in society that when money isn't real, be it a credit card, debit cards, when you don't see it or feel it, you behave differently. And if you've ever gambled, if you ever played blackjack, you play blackjack, when you're using fake chips, it's not a real game, is it? People don't bluff the same way with fake money. People don't play the same way with fake money. You start putting real money on the table, and the whole dynamic changes. So he decided to test this theory with his kids. So he calculated that the amount of dollars in a Monopoly game was about the equivalent of $10,000. So he stops at the bank and pulls out $10,000. He didn't have the 500s. He just had a lot more hundreds. So he says to the kids, he goes, Monopoly game tonight, guys. We're going to play Monopoly as a family, and we're using real money. So imagine pulling out the Monopoly game, and now the ones are real ones, the fives are real fives, the 20s are real 20s, hundreds are real hundreds. He goes, and whoever wins takes it all. He says, what I mean by that is you get $20, because I'm taking the rest back to the bank. But there was really $20 on the line. And he said it was amazing to watch his kids play Monopoly. The strategy he'd observed the last 5 years of playing totally changed. He said, my son, who always buys Park Place and Boardwalk, lands on Park Place. I said, you going to buy it? No. You always buy it. Dad, it's not worth that. Because he had 5 real $100 bills in his hand, that he was going to have to give back anyway, rather than a $500 paper one from Monopoly, even though it was the exact same exercise, it changed his behavior. Real money revealed a different way of prioritizing, a different way of thinking. So he goes, they played, and it was amazing. All their kids, this kid who always did Boardwalk and Park Place, suddenly bought Oriental and all the ones on the first run. Instead of buying the hotels, he's like, I think I'll just do a few houses. I want to keep a little money on the side here. It was a fascinating study in how important it is as parents to teach our kids about money, especially in our digital age, where more and more, that's why Disney spent $2 billion on going to that magic wand. They found that when you don't see the money going out, you spend 20% more. Look at your app store. Look at your kids' app store. Right? When you don't see real money exchanged, you actually behave more irresponsibly. And so people use that to their advantage. But for our perspective, for God's perspective, he's saying, the reason I want you to find your reward in me is because when real money is engaged, and when you give of real money to real priorities, something happens in you, that a mental exercise, the concept of, the idea of time does not work in the same way that money does. And I want you to have the very best. And I want something for you, not something from you. I want you to experience the life you've been going after these other behaviors. So 4 tests. Let's ask ourselves these 4 tests in conclusion today. Number 1, when you think about the things you say are important, God, marriage, family, vacations, relaxing, whatever you have on your list, are you giving half-hearted devotion to those things? And rather than just doubling down your efforts, God says, no, I want you to reflect on how much I love you. I want you to reflect on how much I've given you, how much I've sacrificed for you. And really, let's grow closer together so you can understand that. The natural outflow of understanding how I feel toward you is a change of demeanor and a change of behavior. Secondly, leftover test. And this, I think, is worth challenging yourself on. If you gave to God if you gave to your CEO or your boss what you gave to God, would you be called into somebody's office one day? Would your governor accept that? It's worth considering where we give our leftovers. And with your marriage, are you giving leftover time to your marriage? And is that why there's friction? Is that why there's fights? And is there legitimate reasons to be angry based on how you prioritize your life right now? Lastly, because of that anger, the best test. Are you thinking that the best is on the other side? That the grass is greener some other place? Or might God challenge you today that the grass is greener where you water it? And do you need to look at your schedule, your time, your energy, and ask yourself, where are you really watering these days? Because I bet you wherever you're watering, you're seeing growth occur. And the areas you're starting to neglect, maybe for good reason, for good hurts, I understand. But maybe God will call you to start giving your best to the things that you want to grow. And lastly, the reward test. What if you really, really believed? What if just you tried for a week, tried for a month God's test? And God says, test me in this. If you prioritize what I say to prioritize, see if you will not find a level of generosity and a level of meaning that you've never had before. So 4 tests today. So we reflect on those tests. Maybe you're enjoying this series as we're summarizing books of the Bible. We've been doing this series in some fashion for about 15 years, believe it or not. My goal has been to summarize every book of the Bible. So the series is called Historically Book by Book. So if you've liked this series, you're like, hey, I learned about Romans, I learned about Malachi, I learned about John. What about these other books? If you go to our website, horizoncc.com, if you click Media Downloads and you type into book by book, you can literally get 40, I think we're up to about 40 out of the 66 books of the Bible, and you can literally get a 30-minute summary of books of the Bible and go, wow, I never knew that was about that. We're going to cover 5 more of those in the next couple weeks and ask that God would challenge us to experience His very best. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this just convicting, challenging book to force us to ask the big questions, to ask ourselves if we're really engaging in the best kind of life that you've called us to, and show us how the good we're doing might be able to move to great if we could practice what you've instructed us and walk in this way. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for being here today.